Hello my friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about how to make saying no easier. So I'm so excited because today is actually the first video that I'm not only recording with a new recording device, I am getting serious about my YouTube game, but I am also very excited because this is the first video that I'm like fully recording in my new space. And I'm so pumped about it. I have been loving living here. Don't worry, more moving diaries will be on the way of some of the decor I've been getting, some of the changes I've been making, how I've been setting up my studio, because this is my first time living in a studio. So don't worry, all of that will be coming. But today I just really want to focus on talking about this whole notion of boundary setting and saying no and how we can make that easier for ourselves. So when it comes to boundary setting and saying no, this is one of those things that we all know that we should do, but we often struggle to do, right? It's easy to say, hey, you should set better boundaries, you should say no to this, but sometimes the actual execution of that can be really, really challenging. And there's a reason for that. That reason is guilt. You know, one word, guilt, is often the reason why so many of us struggle with the whole notion of boundary setting and saying no, because we are culturally conditioned to be helpful, to make sure we are there for other people. And I am not trying to be flippant or dismissive of that. That's important. We need those social connections and that social support to get us through situations of stress and burnout. However, what we often do is we often take that too far. What we often do is we often don't say no to anything. And the result of that is spreading ourselves too thin, burning us out, and stressing us out, right? Plus, there's all of these societal pressures to be productive and make sure we are using our time well that make us feel bad or feel like we are not being productive and effective enough if we take that space and that time for our own self-care and our own well-being. Boundaries are crucial for creating that healthy work-life balance and to really just making sure that when we are pouring into other people, we are giving them the best of ourselves and not just the remnants and the leftovers. So the first thing I want to talk about in this video is some alternative phrases that we can use to really set that boundary without saying no. I personally think that actually the best way to make saying no easier is to just not say no. No can be off-putting, it can be abrasive, and my approach to boundary setting is always, how can we do this without pissing the people in our lives off, right? We don't want to slam the door in our face. We just want to establish what our limitations are without being, dismissive and abrupt with them in the process. And there are some alternative phrases that you can use when you are setting a boundary that help to allow that. So the first of those phrases is, I would love to and I appreciate the offer, but I am unable to commit right now. Or, I would love to help, but I am not able to right now. These are two phrases that have the same intention behind them. They express gratitude and appreciation for the offer that is being made, but they also establish your boundaries and your limitations in the process. What I appreciate about phrases like this is it opens the door and opens the opportunity for the invitation to come in the future, even if you're not available to do that at this moment and at this time. You're leaving that door open for them to give the same invitation at a future date, but you're just making it known that at this time, you don't have the bandwidth to do that. The next phrase is, let me think about it and get back to you. Now, what I love about this is oftentimes when we want to say no, we want to A, make sure we are taking space to consider all of our other obligations, and B, we don't want to just say no outright, because again, that can be off-putting, that can be a little abrasive. So this whole notion of let me think about it and get back to you, or let me look at my calendar and get back to you, what that does is it shows that you are putting in your due diligence and you're not just saying yes without thinking about it, but you're also not saying no without thinking about it. You are putting in that due diligence to really, really assess, do I have the time and the bandwidth for this thing? Simultaneously though, what it also does is if you want to say no, you want to say no, but again, you don't want to come off as abrasive or disrespectful, then what this does is that gives you a little bit of space to not only compose yourself, so you have, the wherewithal and the bravery, if you will, to actually say no and set this boundary, but it also really lets that other person to feel that you are considering their offer as opposed to just quickly saying yes or no. So this is a great space to not only give you that space to figure out whether it's a yes or a no, but also to help the other person feel that you are giving that space as well. The next alternative phrase is to say, I am currently prioritizing other commitments, but thank you for considering me. I love this one. I use this one a lot in my business because I get a lot of emails in my business of, will you do this event? Will you be a participant in this summit or this series? I get a lot of those kinds of requests. And frankly, I can't say yes to all of them. I don't have the bandwidth to say yes to all of them because I still have a day job. I have a lot going on. And sometimes I need to really make sure that I am protecting my priorities and not prioritizing somebody else's. I love the notion, I think it was Brendon Burchard that said, the inbox is just a convenient gathering place for other people's priorities. And I find it to be so, so true. So in this case, I use this a lot in those business situations where it really just is somebody kind of trying to make their priority my priority. So I'll often say this. What this also does, if this is a situation where you want to make sure that you are considered for future opportunities, you can always tag that on at the end. So I'm prioritizing other things right now, but thank you for considering me. Please let me know if future opportunities become available like this. So this is a really, really important and helpful little thing to add if you want to make sure that they don't take this no thank you as a she's not interested in the future. Then it kind of allows that door to be open for future opportunities. You're just making it known that you are not available right now. This last one I love in kind of employer, employee, corporate, organizational contexts. I am happy to take this on, but I need to reprioritize other projects and commitments. Can you help me do so? I actually explicitly remember when I was in graduate school and I had to do something very, very similar with my mentor, my boss at the time. They wanted me to take on an additional project that I knew was important, that I knew was high priority, but I also knew, looking at everything else that I had going on, that I was going to have to make some shifts to accommodate this. I didn't have the bandwidth to do this along with all of my other tasks and responsibilities that I had on my plate. So I said something very, very similar to this to my superior at the time. And as a result, this was the really great part of having this conversation. Not only did it make it known that I had a lot on my plate and I was having difficulty prioritizing it, so it's a subtle way to make that known, but I also made sure that the priorities and the reprioritization that I was doing were in line with what she felt were the highest priority activities. So this is a great way to make it known, hey, I have a lot on my plate right now and I'm getting stretched really thin, while simultaneously making sure that whatever your reprioritization is matches the reprioritization and the priorities of your organization and your company. So these are some great alternative phrases that you can use to not only express and indicate what your boundaries are, but to make sure that you are communicating those boundaries in a way that is polite, that is respectful, and is not off-putting and really isn't just gonna piss people off. Now I have one more pro tip to leave you with before we wrap up today's video, and that is really just another means to help making saying no easier. It's not sometimes just about these alternative phrases. When it comes to saying no and setting boundaries, here is my most important tip, and the tip that I speak about all the time with clients. Build up to your hardest no. Now, what I mean by this is that it is often most difficult for us to express boundaries and limits on our time to, for example, family members and loved ones. It is really, really hard to set those boundaries, especially because in situations, I know that very, very stereotypical situation with like a grandma or a parent, they might pull the I might not be here that much longer card. Like, thanks, grandma, now I feel like a dick, right? So that is definitely something that can happen when we're setting boundaries with loved ones. And even if they don't say that, we can just feel guilty in and of ourselves because we're thinking that, you know, I'm really grateful for this person. I don't know how much longer they're going to be in my life, right? So it can be very, very challenging to set boundaries with family. So my recommendation is always don't set those boundaries first. Build up to setting those boundaries. And a great place to start is by using a more passive option to help you start communicating your boundaries. Now, when I say a more passive option, what I am referring to, for example, let's think about it in a corporate or organizational context. Using something at the bottom of your email signature or an out of office responder is a great way to set a boundary, but in a more passive fashion. I actually have something at the bottom of all of my email signatures, both for my day job and my business, that establishes my availability. In my business, if you've emailed me, you've probably seen this. In my business, that line is something akin to, I do not check my email after 7 p.m. PST on weeknights, and I do not check on weekends, because could couldn't we all be more disconnected? And I have actually gotten nothing but positive feedback about having that below my email signature. In fact, some people have asked me to incorporate it into speaking workshops, or they have just praised the fact that I'm really attempting to practice what I preach. Am I perfect with it? No, not by any stretch, but I am at least attempting to practice what I preach in doing this. And by having that boundary there, not only does it, tell other people that I have this boundary, but it also reminds me that I have this boundary. Those are some examples of more passive boundaries that you can set. But once you start setting those boundaries, again, don't immediately start to dive into the boundaries with your family or your friends. Again, those might be some of the hardest boundaries for you to set. What I would recommend is to start with the easier social boundaries from there. For example, I am very, very quick to block, unmute, unfollow on social media because for the most part, those are not, close relationships. There are definitely people that I've met online that I have developed close relationships with, but at that point, they no longer fall into the social media relationships category. They just fall into the friendships category. So that is a place where I am very, very quick to set my boundaries. I'm also pretty quick to set boundaries with coworkers and superiors at my day job. Where it starts to become a little bit more difficult for me is when we're talking about my clients. I develop close relationships with my clients and I genuinely care not only about their results, but I care about them as people. And so it can be a lot harder to set boundaries with a client as opposed to just like a coworker. But then again, from there, the hardest ones are with family and friends. It's different if it is a, social commitment that they're just asking me to participate in versus a situation where they really need me. And maybe I just don't have the bandwidth to pour into that. That is where it really just starts to become challenging. Or maybe sometimes we have families that just kind of expect a lot of us when it comes to the level of communication, the level of socializing they expect from us. And that's where it can become really, really hard. So those are definitely my hardest relationships to set boundaries in. So I usually start by really, really reinforcing and making sure I have strong boundaries in these other places. And then that makes it easier. You're basically building the boundary setting muscle to make it easier for you to then set boundaries with those harder relationships. So in a nutshell, setting boundaries is hard. Saying no is hard, but it is so important for creating that healthy work-life balance and making sure you're not taking on too much and spreading yourself too thin. Now, I will fully acknowledge at the end of this video that for some of us, the reason why we have full calendars and spread ourselves too thin actually has nothing to do with saying yes to commitments to other people. It just has to do with our own self-imposed need to have busyness in our lives. That is definitely a category I fall into. And for people who are like that, this video may not have resonated with you very much. Maybe you got a couple ideas for how you can set boundaries without saying no and you liked those, but maybe the bigger issue for you is the fact that you just have a personal self-imposed tendency to put too much on your plate. That's going to be a whole separate video later on, but I definitely want to address that not all of us have busy lives and overwhelming calendars because of the commitments we're making to other people. Sometimes it is purely the self-imposed and the commitments we are making to ourselves are the things that we feel like we quote unquote need to do. That might be the reason why you have a busy calendar. So if you fall into that category, don't worry, I'm going to get to you later. But for those of you that really, really needed to hear this today, again, use alternative phrases to make saying no easier. Don't feel like you just need to say an outright no. There are alternatives you can use and reference back to earlier in the video for the rundown of those different phrases. And then secondly, really make sure you're building up to those hardest boundaries to set. Don't start with the hardest ones first. It's going to be really, really, really challenging, perhaps impossible for you to do that and set those boundaries. So make sure you're building up to those hardest boundaries. Start with the passive and easier ones first. So with that, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. If you're liking what you're seeing on this channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, drop a comment below if you've got any feedback. If you have any alternative phrases that you love to use when it comes to setting boundaries and saying no, go ahead and share them below with everybody else who watches the video. And with that, once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.